Hello, global audience. Welcome to the 2020 series presented by the New York Film Academy. I am Liz Hinlein, creative director and filmmaker. The 2020 series are conversations with creative visionaries about craft, creativity, and collaboration. And we have a 20-minute back and forth chit chat about all things craft, tech. We geek out on that. And then we're going to be taking 20 minutes of questions from you, the global audience. So please write into the Q&A if you have any questions. And I am so proud and thrilled to present a brilliant Nollywood filmmaker, storyteller, craftsman, Femi Odugbemi. Hello, Femi.
Hi, Liz. Nice to see you.
Hi. I hope I didn't bastardize your name too bad. I tried.
You did all right.
One of the genius things that we talked about this past week when we were chit-chatting together is that you said all good storytelling is about humanity. And I would just love to have more input on that. You are a global filmmaker, you're an African filmmaker. What do you mean by that?
Well, stories are important simply because they help us to understand our world, to understand our cultures, to understand ourselves. It's sort of like it's how we communicate, really. And so all stories eventually are about humanity. They're about the shared experiences and the shared ambitions and the shared desires. Everybody, regardless of where you come from, desires love, desires prosperity, desires connection, desires achievement. And regardless of in what ways your culture structures, those desires are the heart of your connections. And because film is about the human connections, is about us communicating both in language, in gestures, and so much subliminality in terms of context, in terms of the world that's around from where the stories are located. It's all about a shared humanity. That's why I would understand a Chinese film without speaking, the language, or an Indian film, which were the films that were popular when I grew up in the 60s and 70s in Lagos. And they were never subtitled, but we understood, the humanity of love, the anger. We understood those who wanted to be a champion or to be rich or to be strong. All of this is why I say all stories are, in the end, human stories. So, and I often say that so that we remove labeling. It's easy to easily call something an American story. Well, it's a human story from America. It's a perspective. A Nollywood story is not any less a human story. It just provides you information on a backdrop of perhaps a cultural experience you're not familiar with. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really keen on storytellers championing a culture. I want storytellers to champion the human experience, give us insight so that those of us who may not be of that cultural experience are still able to be enriched by the stories that you tell.
Oh, 100%, 100%. So with the big Nollywood film industry, what is the world view of Nollywood and what is the insider view of Nollywood?
Well, I mean, the one thing that everyone agrees with is that Nollywood is an organically grown film culture from Nigeria that perhaps has surprised a lot of people in terms of the quantity of its production, the passion of its practitioners, and the fact that we're able to do so much with so little. If you recall that, Nollywood came out of a space where there were really no grants, there were no funding per se. So a lot of it is really driven by just the passion of the storytellers to create something. And in doing so, I mean, in the course of 25, 30 years, it's something that has grown organically, grown in terms of the quality of storytelling, grown in terms of the quality of cinematic, exposition, grown in performances as well. But it's also grown globally because the audience have also been, how will I say, there's a lot of Africans in the diaspora who have introduced African cinema, which is what I now call Nollywood, introduced it as a way to connect with their neighbors, to introduce their origin, to get their children into a space where heritage can be visually, communicated. So yeah, that's for me the first thing. But in terms of from here, what I think is clear is that there is a constant understanding of possibilities, the idea that beyond being successful, Nollywood needs to be significant. Why? Because Nollywood may be the African voice for changing a lot of things that you would call the narrative about Africa. One of the things that I think has been powerful about Nollywood is that it's provided basic information to update what you would call the National Geographic narrative of Africa, where anyone who has never been to Africa or been to Nigeria thinks that everywhere is a forest. And so it's in the most basic form, an interesting narrative side by side with what has been, where you only saw Africa from the perspective of poverty and disease and wars. Thanks to Nollywood, you also see Africa that has cities, that has professors, that has beautiful cars, and I dare say beautiful women, and incredibly successful entrepreneurs. And I think it's very important that nobody is going to tell the new Africa, the new African story on our behalf. The time of colonialism is gone. Storytelling is now what I call the new soft power. And so whilst we may not be able to compete in terms of military power, we may not be able to compete in terms of economic power, we certainly can compete in terms of the soft power of storytelling to sort of shape, shape our view of the world, and to put, a voice out there that says, this is who we are, this is who we want to be. And it's a work in progress, but it's something certainly that I think Nollywood has been magnificent in achieving.
That's amazing. With so many various countries in Africa, though, is Nollywood able to have an umbrella over them all? Or it's still such a young industry? How is it shaking out?
Well, I was invited to be part of a jury in Uganda for 3 years. And what I saw there is a whole load of, passionate young people also trying to tell their story, taking advantage of technology, not waiting until there's a grant from some foreign organization. They simply are inspired to go forward and tell their story at whatever level that they can. And I think that's very importantly the impact of Nollywood. Remember, 25 years ago, there were a lot of people who just laughed at Nollywood simply because the films were made with, poor cameras, the performances were a work in progress, the storytelling were clearly not as educated as it needed to be. But over the course of time, thanks to its audiences who were very aware of these shortcomings, but had decided that these stories were important. They were more important in substance and significance than they were in technical craft. And over time, a lot has changed to inspire other African countries and other African cultures. And I don't like to say that, Nollywood has imported itself or exported itself. More like it has inspired filmmakers in neighboring countries, in Francophone countries, as far away as South Africa. And this is very important, I think, for African storytellers to simply make that shift from waiting for funding, for validation, whether it's from Paris or from America or from England, to simply understand that unless they are the authors and owners of their narrative, the authenticity of it would always be up for debate. Because there is no way you get a grant from France and you're not subject to the approval of those who give you the grant. And that approval may simply be a small shape in the story, a little bit of editing preference, but it's still not entirely your story. And I think what's clearly happening is Nollywood is inspiring Africa to tell their story. Don't wait until you have $50 million to make a film. And I think that's a movement and a revolution that is also ongoing locally because we're prioritizing training. As you know, I am Academy Director of the Multi-Choice Talent Factory. The reason I am interested and the reason this whole movement to train and to empower the filmmakers is so key is simply because the passion is there. And for truly be sustainable, the passion has to acquire education. And I think it's important that an institution like MultiChoice is committing investment into that, partnering with the New York Film Academy, partnering with filmmakers across the world to say, can we give these young people a chance?
And as we were talking about before, there's an audience and a thirst for homegrown material and talent and storytelling. And so what would be some specifics of like Nigerian storytelling that's very essential to the culture?
Well, I mean, one of the things is clear that makes our storytelling different is that it's in many ways three-dimensional. There is the added dimension of our spirituality, the fact that our stories are both physical and metaphysical. The idea that, we can tell a story where, someone interfaces with an ancestor or interfaces with a dead character, and we do not have to prepare the audience for it. It's not unusual. Why? Because it's part of the culture that, we believe that life is sort of like an ongoing existence in realms. And it's possible for your protagonist to be unseen. It's possible for your antagonist to be unseen. A lot of Nollywood films will talk about, especially in the early days, we talk about witches and wizards and people killing people by blowing powder on them. For you, it does not pass the test of, plausibility. But for us and our audiences, it works. It's totally fine. There are things that you would have a problem with in a narrative. A traditional man having more than one wife, having 4 or 5 wives, when he's actually poor, to you would be weird because it's illogical. But to us, it's also part of this culture. So there are what I call, there are so many cultural things that emerge in a Nollywood film that also have also evolved over the years, also represent our city experience, contemporary experiences, historical connections of family. There are things that we do here that is accepted. I can arrive in my brother's house without warning, and it would be unthinkable to ask him why he did not give me a call, before coming. Whereas anywhere else, those sorts of things would be weird. So there is a way in which I do think, subliminally, there are many things that are put on the table. Obviously, I do not have to speak about things like costuming. I do not have to speak to you about things like, you know, habitats. The context of our stories are in themselves, you know, provide a lot of information just about, you know, spatial relationships, cultural relationships in terms of parents and child and lovers, and the kind of things that we obviously are not, how shall I say, it takes a village to raise a child. That concept is essentially African. The idea of care and the fact that every young person in a community is to be taken care of by the nearest adult. Things that you still find in our storytelling that I think, you know, allows us to present a unique worldview through our stories.
Do you find that culturally that Nigeria wants to retain, you know, honoring the past as well as, you know, moving forward into modernity and success and making money? Or is there a division between, like, you know, the glitzy eye on the prize and then leaving behind the cultural stories and things like that?
There's a bit of a mix. I do think that there is a whole section of Nollywood that does a lot of traditional stories, a lot of stories, you know, that may be time, a period pieces, but there's a huge chunk that about our contemporary experiences. There's been one or two that have also foreshadowed a future. I am very keen. I think that over the 25 years or so that Nollywood has been, there's a lot of stories told about the past. I would like that to evolve into us connecting, because we also have an incredibly rich literary heritage. We have a lot of authors who have done a lot of great stories. My uncle, Chief Dio Fagwa, was one of the first authors of novels in Yoruba language. Some of those stories we do need to bring to cinema to connect them to very important, you know, creative works of the past. I do think that foreshadowing is a critical space we must move into. Our storytelling needs to begin to to model a future that we desire. I think that, you know, we talk about our ambitions in terms of good governance, in terms of more rapid development, in terms of economic progress. And I think our films need to begin to create heroes along those lines. Because right now we have stories that are contemporary, but in many ways timid. Because, and I'm being very careful, but the truth is, we have, in a way, a situation politically, developmentally, we have issues, we have, you know, issues of, development issues that somehow have not made it into our cinema in a way that models how we would like it to be, not just how it is. And I think that's really critical. And I tell my students, the first idea that, a Black man could sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office is from cinema. And that's very important that, you know, people are able to store away that image as a possibility in their subconscious. And so in the fullness of time, it happens because cinema does that. And for me, I think that's something that our cinema has to do. It has to begin to reach into the future, not just to talk about Nigeria going to the moon or Mars or something like that, but something that connects us to our ambitions as a people, perhaps a more prosperous, more organized, less corruption-ridden political culture, We just need heroes. We need to create those heroes through our storytelling.
Oh, I totally agree, 100%. And the other thing is we talked a bit about, you have some strong ideas about how COVID is going to be affecting filmmaking, not only in Nollywood, but sort of globally. And I'd love to hear about that some more.
Well, I mean, COVID is obviously something that that is inviting all of us to rethink everything. The impact of it in a film culture like Nollywood that is actually doesn't have a lot of funding, that is actually struggling in terms of the size of its budgets. The impact of that is that it introduces a cost element to its budgets that you know would do a lot of it, would have a huge impact. You now have to deal with insurance, you know, for that possibility. You have to deal with, you know, all sorts of protocol issues. You have to test people. And today in Nigeria, a test for COVID done in a private hospital is over 50,000 naira. All of this, if you put that cost onto the budget of a Nollywood film, it's a lot that's not ending up on screen. So that's going to be the first challenge. But I think the other challenge is also how we begin to mine these stories that are evolving, and how we express this in terms of storytelling. Spatial relationships, I keep asking people, is a kiss still a kiss in a post-COVID world? There are just so many things that I think comes into play that impacts a smaller film culture like ours. Of course, the distribution part is going to be a huge, huge hit because we don't have that many cinemas to start with. We've got less than about 100 cinemas for 180 million people. If you start to socially distance in cinemas, I mean, coming from the impact of people having to get back into the cinema going culture after being home for months, it all just looks really difficult. And you understand that the government already had a budget deficit. We're not planning very much for this. Healthcare infrastructure was always a work in progress. So yeah, the industry is really going to be badly hit, and it needs conversations with other professionals. The insurance industry is in particular about how do we mitigate you know, the impact of this, especially on budgets, because, you know, when the budget is affected, choices are affected. Choices are affected in our direction. Choices are affected in the ambition of the story itself. Choices are affected even in the selection of performers. So that's really where it's at the moment.
And it is a global film crisis as well. So every producer, every filmmaker is having this impact. And also, you know, getting on their DIY like sweatsuit, saying, okay, how are we going to do this? How can we do this on our iPhone? And, you know, as we say, your budget is your creativity. So let it work for you.
Might make us more efficient, surely, because surely now you got to figure out how many people
Femi, I think I'm not hearing your voice.
There you go.
There you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
I can.
I mean, efficiency, it's going to improve, or at least invite us to be more efficient in the processes. Surely you have to have all your ducks in a row before you actually can say project is ready to fly. Issues like planning, production planning, you know, recce, all those things, you won't be able to do as many of them as you were doing before. Maybe you do a few using videos and Zoom conferences and castings. You know, this technology will provide a solution, I'm sure, but it will require all of us to think in terms of how can we be more efficient, how can we do more with less, because we absolutely will have less, that's for sure.
Agreed. So I'm going to go to some questions here. Comfort asks, what is your advice for new producers who want to produce their first features with limited budgets? Should we direct our stories to save money Nigerian directors can be quite expensive in terms of costing for a new producer. Interesting, they're quite expensive. Is it because there's not many of them or because they're smart and charge a lot?
Well, I mean, you have to also respect the work the directors do. If you don't value a director's work, don't put them on the project because it's a waste of money. You will constantly double guess their work. If you bring a director to a project, it's because you think that director has the creative skills and know-how to make that project achieve its best potential. Mm-hmm. And if you think you have the creativity to take that work to its best level, then put everything you've got into it. If you're convinced you have the talent and you have the skills. But directing is not something that you simply decide to do. There has to be, there's a set of skills, there's a skill set, and there's a passion. And then there is, directors disappear into this world. And it's important that they're well remunerated for what they do, especially talented directors. So I would suggest to you that, the director is not where you save as a first-time producer. There are many, get a proper line producer, get a proper production manager, and figure out what's your best budget to start with. You can always do barter exchanges. I always say to young filmmakers, not everything in film is about money. Sometimes it's an exchange. Sometimes it's you go do something for them so they can do something for you. Sometimes it's about credit on the film. Sometimes it's about showing goods or services. You just have to be resourceful, mm-hmm. But don't make the director the line item of savings.
Yes, if you're going to spend money, spend it on people, not equipment.
Exactly, you phrased it right.
Exactly.
Who make films.
Harshil asks, I'd like to ask what, according to you, are the stereotypes about Nollywood, and how do you think we can break those stereotypes about Nollywood and also the industry on the global level as well?
Well, I tell you, one of the regrettable things about Stereotypes of Nollywood is that there's a lot of films from the early days of Nollywood that are just making the rounds. And what it exposes or gets people fixated on is a history that's long gone. When you see Nollywood today, you have to understand that there is a world of difference. There's such a huge world of difference in everything. In the early days, there were a lot of folks who all they had was the passion, whether it was to perform or to tell stories or to be a cameraman. The passion was all it was. And the cameras and the equipment themselves were not great. But, over time, there's been a generational evolution. You now have more and more young people who are, well-trained in film schools, but you also have the simple, sensible logic that practice has made perfect for even people that did not go to school. Mm-hmm. To make enough mistakes over 20 years, you will get good at anything. And I think Nollywood is an incredibly upward trajectory in terms of quality of exposition, in terms of visual narrative structure, in terms of the content and the representations and the power of the stories. I have been privileged to be head of jury of the Africa Magic Viewers Choice Awards for 4 times. And the awards are 7 years old, so I was there in the first year to see the quality of the films. And I was also head judge last year or early this year, and I see the quality of the films. And I'm very excited about where the quality is. So if there is a problem, is that in the age of digital video, you can't bury your past. I mean, there are films I made in my early days that I wish I could kill everyone that saw it or bury it somewhere, simply because, you know, I think I'm much better than I used to be. And that's the way Nollywood has been. And I think it's important that people speak to Nollywood of today, not Nollywood of the past. And I have to say this, Liz, it's unfortunate because a lot of people in academia are doing research on Nollywood and constantly bringing up those films and those imagery from its history. And that, while that's important, I also feel like a lot of scholars like Jonathan Haynes and you know, Okome, Paul Ugo, these guys did the you know, they did the work at the time, and they helped define what it was, what that movement was, what it was trying to say, where it's going. So I do feel a lot of work has been done on the history of Nollywood. I do feel that a lot of scholars need to look at what it's doing now. There's a lot of courage to a lot of the work, and there's a lot of width to how it's the exposition of culture. And culture is not just about the past. Culture is what are our contemporary experiences. There's a lot of young Nigerians, and it's not just Nigerians. Africa is 60% people under the age of 50. So there is also a young, vibrant population that is also being represented in these modern stories. And so for me, yeah, that's the biggest thing, is that we've got people constantly resurrecting the past and using it as a measuring stick for the present. And it's not just unfair, it's incorrect.
Exactly. I mean, you're comparing it to, say, Hollywood, it would be like, it's a totally unfair comparison because Hollywood's been around for 200 years. It's a certain type of filmmaking. Obviously, there's all these nuances between studio and indie and stuff like that. And you really can't make them one and the same, or that Nollywood's craft isn't up there. And maybe the communication, the languaging of the Nollywood film also might be very different than a Hollywood film.
I agree totally. You just nailed on something that's also important to quickly mention. The idea that we use a certain film culture as a measuring stick is wrong. We can't make a Hollywood film as good as Hollywood will tell its own story. Indian films have improved on the structure of their films since I was a child. I mean, they had songs in it, they had the trains, they had, you know, but over time, it's the same structure, same cultural, compass, but higher levels of efficiency and in the visual communication. That to me is the future of Nollywood, that we will tell our story, not tell the American story in Nigeria. It's off and it's wrong, and you can't sell another culture on their own culture. You're bound to communicate poorly, regardless of how thick you can be. But, you know, we do this in politics, we do this in economy, we compare everything to, you know, and that's understandable, but it's not valid.
Exactly. And to follow up on that, Fola asked, what are your views on Netflix coming to Nigeria? Should we as independent producers scramble to get our work on the platform? Or should we just focus on bettering our craft and wait for them to reach out to us? So is Netflix, what does that mean? Netflix is showing non-Nigerian work?
Well, there's a lot. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, Netflix has got Netflix Africa. And I am just as excited as every filmmaker in Africa that this global platform is offering an opportunity, a window for the work of Africans. And the reason this is very important, is that it takes the work even farther, allows the rest of the world a window into our stories. So for me, it's a win-win. We need as many platforms as can come into Africa and help us, find audiences, to consume our stories. I think that's the plus side. But I think the questioner has answered the question. Regardless of whether it's Netflix or Showmax or, whatever the name of the platform is, Iroko, you're an artist. Just do your work. Just tell a story. Don't tell a story for a platform. Tell a story for a people. Tell a story that has got you passionate, a story that when you look at it, you feel validated as a storyteller. And if the platform comes for it, all good. If they don't, all good. There would always be somewhere for you to show your story. And I think the idea that, we have this thing sometimes in our industry where people have a one-upmanship with each other. The competition is, what's the latest thing? Does my film on Netflix mean I'm a better filmmaker? I'm not sure. There's a lot of poor films on Netflix from Nigeria.
Exactly.
Just as much as there's some very, very good Nigerian films. So Netflix is a commercial platform. It gives you an opportunity for audiences to see your work. The audience must decide they want to see your work. And that's what I think all of us as storytellers must aim for. How do we give the best 100% effort to tell the best story that we can?
Do you, and with it having such a young country there, what are you finding? Are people getting more and more into genre as far as audience, like what is the audience saying they're hungry for?
Well, I'll be honest with you, data is still a work in progress, especially audience data. One of the things that I hope we grow in is in research, is in being able to actually know how much an audience like a particular genre of film, or what is it that's, shall I say, trending now. One thing that's clear, Nigerians love comedies. Oh, they love to laugh. Nigerians love to laugh. The films that have done the best in Nigeria have often had a large chunk of it has been funny. And of course, it's not just regular funny. It's usually Nigeria funny because we've got pidgin language, we've got cultural nuances. We're a bit, strange sometimes. And we've got things that happen that don't happen anywhere else. How we do our weddings, how we party, all these things. When you represent them in film really well and in a funny way, our audiences always go for a laugh. But I love to see how well, what a slice of the audience is for horror. What's the slice of the audience for thriller? What's the slice of the audience for, what are the other, for action films? The idea of this is that not every filmmaker can make a funny story. Well, not every filmmaker should want to make a funny story. I'm not any good at making funny stories, but I still want to be able to create a film in which there are things that are interesting, funny, quirky. I don't set out to make a comedy. I would set out to make a dramatic story that may have a character that's funny, but that's it. So yeah, the genre is something that will encourage more specialization. It's important that we're able to build storytelling brands. I mean, when you hear someone's name, you ought to be able to sort of guess what his film culture is, how he tells his story, what you might be able to expect in terms of genre. I think that's something that would evolve over time. But yes, that's where we are.
That's great. That's super great. So we are come to the end of our time slot. What else, where can we find you, Femi? Where can the audiences seek you out?
Well, I do a lot of TV series. So if right now we just, one of my old series, Battleground, has been acquired by a French distributor, so there will be that globally. I've got a few platforms as well that have one or two or three of my works, but that's really it. I'm not on Netflix at the moment, so that's possibly means that you're not going to see it in America, but there are many other platforms that you can.
And do you have a social Instagram, something,
Of course.
Twitter?
Of course, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. How can I not be? My work is also on Vimeo. There's YouTube. There's a few works on YouTube that I've put out there for people to see. Just type, my name is the only ID I have for all my platforms.
Wonderful. And is there anything that you want to say to, especially to African filmmakers that are listening right now?
Well, it's just to say that I'm here because I'm also part of the Multi-Choice Talent Factory. And to say that in the last couple of years, we've graduated now about 120 young filmmakers. It means that there are a lot of young, passionate filmmakers out there in the three hubs, in the three regions of Africa, who are in need of support, who are in need of mentors, who are in need of guidance. And I hope that, you know, all of us who have had opportunity as filmmakers, as storytellers, also understand that we owe it to this generation to pay it forward, to support their dreams and to help guide them, to give them opportunity on your platforms and help us to grow this generation next in a certain direction. So that's something I'd like to leave out there. Obviously, to also say thank you to you, Lizzie, and to the New York Film Academy for a wonderful opportunity to be part of this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. This was the most fun and so interesting. And thank you, New York Film Academy, for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation. And tune in next week to the 2020 series. Thanks, everyone. Be safe. Bye. Salam.